Hey, so we're coming back to JavaScript now. So we're going to start using these things called libraries. If you remember when we went and looked at Bootstrap, on the home page of Bootstrap, it said, or in the title up here, it said the most popular HTML, CSS, and JS library in the world. But I was calling it a framework. So what's the difference here? Well, don't really worry about it, but a framework is usually about CSS and HTML, and a library is usually more about JavaScript. These terms are somewhat moved around. It's not a very strong distinction. You can kind of use each term to refer to each other depending on specific things. But in this case, I'm splitting them a little bit to have frameworks be more about our front-end design type stuff, and libraries to refer more to our JavaScript stuff now that we're going to plug in. So when I say we're going to plug it in, what do we mean? Well, a lot of the time you can imagine a lot of the problems we're trying to solve when we're programming are things other people have done before. For instance, generating that random number like we did. Now that was just built right into JavaScript. I didn't have to write a function that would generate a random number. I could just do math.random and it gives me the random number between 0 and 1. So that's not requiring a library. That's just built into JavaScript. But imagine if it wasn't built into JavaScript, and theoretically, we'd have to write it every time. Now, there's nothing stopping someone out there from writing that function and then just sharing it on the internet, like when you go to Stack Overflow and there's someone who wrote the answer and told you how to generate a random number. So someone can already do that, and we know already that you can link in JavaScript from other places. Like we linked in here at the bottom not only our own JavaScript from our own site, but we linked in the Bootstrap JavaScript, which is just a JavaScript file that's loaded at some other place on the internet. So in theory, then, someone could write that function that makes a random number, put a file up on the internet somewhere that has that function in it, and then we could just link that function in our script tag, and now link that script in our script tag, and now we'd have access to that function. So the idea is that people can share this code and this functions, and that's basically what a library is. A library is a set of functions that have some particular use for some particular thing you're trying to build, where someone's already done it before and maybe has solved lots of the basic problems that you would otherwise have to do from scratch. So that's why Bootstrap is a library, is because they have all these things like these nav bars, which are things that they've written and you don't have to do again. You just include, you put it in there, and it just works easily. But there's tons and tons of libraries. So what are some other examples of those kinds of problems? Well, there's things like date pickers. This is a common one, where when you click, and you've done this on bajillions of sites, in order to have this whole interface that tells you what day you're on, shows the calendar, you can imagine there's a whole bunch of HTML and CSS that goes into this, and it has to detect when you click different things. Then it has to fill in this input. You can kind of imagine, even if it would be really hard to write, like how this would work. Well, this is a library, and there's actually tons and tons of different ones. They look different, some of them. They have different functionalities. Some of them allow you to choose like a range, like a start and end date, like if, I can come between these dates or whatever. There's so many functionalities. Even on the side here, it has a whole bunch of examples of different types of functions. Now, this is just inside this thing called jQuery that we could use this. We could plop this into our site and use it ourselves. Another thing that many libraries do is they have a type ahead, what's called the type ahead. So as I'm typing, it starts to give me examples of possible things that could be what I'm looking for. This is fairly common. I'm sure you've seen it also on Google Maps when you start to type, the name of your town. You only have to type like 3-4 letters, and then it starts to be like, oh, are you looking for that town? And sometimes it gives you the same name of the town, but in a different place, so you have to type a bit more. But that's basically a library. It's something that makes this drop down and puts the examples nice and easy to see. You can click on one, and then it does a thing, right? Another library, which is really what we're doing this whole course about ultimately, is the mapping. Mapping is basically a JavaScript library that you include. And, here's the CSS that we'll be including, and here's the JavaScript. And then we have a whole bunch of It lets us do a bunch of stuff. It lets us load a map on our page and do all this special customization that we'll be doing. Now, those are some examples of different libraries. Now, a lot of the time, most of the time, libraries are open source. So that means that they're basically, anyone can contribute to them, anyone can fix them, anyone can comment and say what they don't like about them or what should be better. A lot of times there's many thousands of people involved in the very popular ones. And this is really great because, for one, it's free. You can just use them in your project. Most of the time, the licensing is just totally open. And second, it's really great because it's constantly being improved by a huge army of programmers. And generally, they're all using it in their projects, so they're quite motivated to keep it up to date and improved. On the other hand, it's also a bit annoying because they're all very, very different in the way that they explain how to use them. So the documentation for Leaflet is in this website that they built. And when we're going to look at this docs a lot more when we get to Leaflet, but there's all these links which then go to examples of stuff, and it can be a little confusing. Meanwhile, for this jQuery date picker, it's like, okay, it has this thing about documentation, and you have to go here, and it's totally different. It's a different type of layout. It's a different thing. Meanwhile, there's Bootstrap, which has its documentation, which is in its own certain way. And this can be a bit of a hassle because you never know with a library if you're getting to use like a good documentation that's going to make sense and be easy, or it's going to be like old and really hard to navigate through. That's just a major thing that it runs into. But nevertheless, we use these. We use these all the time. And eventually, as you really get to develop, you'll start to get a sense of like, is what I'm trying to do handled by some library out there already? And you'll start to get used to looking stuff up that you might do a quick search, for something, and then someone in the Stack Overflow will link, oh, there's a library that does that. And then you'll be like, oh, great, I'll just load that JavaScript into my file and use the library. It's not always that easy, again, because the documentation can be tricky, but this is what we do. We use them because it really cuts down on development time. You don't have to program all this stuff yourself. You can just, imagine if I had to build the whole thing to display a map myself, it would be huge. So I can just use this. It cuts down enormously on development time and gives me a nice interface, avoids some of those big complicated issues or edge cases or things like with Bootstrap, having this mobile thing. I don't have to think about that. It just does it. So that cuts down on development time hugely. A lot of the times, people have also thought out the solution way smarter. So you might think, oh, I need a date picker. And then you'll find one and you'll be like, wow, it's better than I could have ever made. And that's really great. It can make you seem even like a better developer than you are because you're just using other people's great code. That's awesome. We can also customize them, right? Like we can, just like we did with Bootstrap, we can add our own CSS to overwrite certain things. And there's ways to hook in JavaScript depending on the different libraries. Again, we'll get into that once we start using them. And we will be using them basically the rest of the course because the mapping that we're going to be doing is through libraries. So how do we find libraries for what we need? One, we stumble on them, like through Stack Overflow. Like I said, you eventually get a feel, so you might start searching, oh, generate random number library, JavaScript. And that'll help you Google and maybe find what you're looking for. So it's a general kind of like combination of this problem that I'm working on isn't extremely unique, and maybe other people have solved this. If you're trying to solve some problem that doesn't seem totally unique to you, chances are the library has been written that does it. And there are like millions of libraries. There's many, many, many of them. So let's take a quick look just at one of my own sites and see how much I'm using libraries on this page. Okay, so first of all, it's Bootstrap. You might be able to recognize it. The buttons look the same, so we're using Bootstrap. Second, we're using Mapbox here. That's a mapping library that we're going to look into. Third, I have these like switches. Well, that's a thing. I didn't build those myself. I linked in some other CSS and JavaScript. Then I have one of these type ahead things so that if I start searching for Squamish, I can find the Squamish nation, indigenous nation, or look for a place. That's another library. Okay, these drop downs, which allow me to type ahead and quickly find something, is another library that I'm using. It's just full of libraries. Like there's libraries all over the place in a website like this. So when we're building a site, we end up using a lot of these. We stack them together, we plug them in different ways, and it just makes things so much better than having to build it all yourself. Now, there are a ton of super specialized libraries, but some of the really big ones that you're going to see or you're going to hear about are jQuery, which we're going to use, React, JavaScript. You might have even heard of this before, but we're not going to use it in this course. It's what we call a framework, a JavaScript framework. That's a whole way to structure applications. Way too complicated for this course. That's something to learn maybe a month down the road for you if you're new. And also there's another one called Node.js, which is a whole other can of worms as well that we're not going to get into in this course, but is used to do kinds of back-end development with JavaScript. Those are some really big ones, but there are so many. So we're going to get into using jQuery. We're not going to get as complicated as this date picker, but jQuery is one of the oldest libraries that's been around. It simplifies a lot of very basic stuff. So back when I talked about, oh, we're going to make these click events look easier or they're going to happen more easily, I was referencing jQuery. The jQuery makes this, it's a little easier to read. It's a little easier to do it with jQuery. And many people actually confuse jQuery and JavaScript. They think that one is the other, or they're different things. There's JavaScript, which is like the language, and then jQuery is a library that we use to do some stuff in JavaScript. So in the next video, we're going to start using jQuery and start seeing like why we'd use it and get used to the idea of using a library and looking at documentation.